Oasis Skateboard Factory is an alternative school design program in Toronto. We reimagine high school as a skateboard company and a professional design studio. So at our program, students develop their own skateboard brands and products. They design them, they market them, they retail them, they have the chance to make a little bit of money. We have a very high graduation rate for students who've never experienced school success before. Our students develop a really amazing portfolio of work because all the work we do is situated in the world. And the big part of that is also design being something that solves other people's problems. And I was one of the catalysts of that. This school that was trying to work with at-risk youth, but not really having an engagement hook. Within that program, in my art class, I just by a whim went to a local hardware store and saw a guy doing a demo of a way to do vacuum forming skateboards in vacuum pressure. And from that, I was like, had conversations with him and I'm like, well, why don't we try making skateboards in a classroom? So we made some skateboards in the class. And what I discovered is that while all the other classes at the school which struggle with attendance, my classes were packed. It went from a project in a class to its own separate class. So then I started teaching the street art class and the skateboard class. I would take pictures of them with these skateboards and they were very powerful because they were so proud of this object they made. Kids who drop out of school, they have a series of unfinished projects, right? So all of a sudden they had this thing they made that they cared about, right? Like a skateboard, something they care about. They're proud of it. The images were often speaking with their voice to really amazing, poignant things in their lives. And they were kind of unique expressions of themselves too. They're very esoteric, individual things, but had this link to this bigger social thing that people could see in these photographs. So from that, people would want to buy them from students. And then we started getting commissions from people. So I get a lot of props for being this innovator and bringing entrepreneurship to schools. It wasn't even purposeful. I'm not really someone who's passionate about the business world or anything like that. It's not my background. But my students invented an economy. I went to school in California. I was passionate about sort of skateboards as part of that street art culture. So it wasn't a core skateboarder. And actually, I found out that idea, this core idea, is part of the problem in skateboard culture, that creates a gatekeeping thing where who belongs. And at the beginning of my program, all the kids looked like, I guess not with big beards, but versions of me. They were white guys, right? And when I launched Oasis Skateboard Factory, when I left the Arts and Social Change program and launched this program as its own independent program 12 years ago, with its own location and its own focus, where we were going to study all the high school credits through the lens of skateboards and skateboard design, I realized that these skateboards could be the vehicle for students to complete their high school education. We link every subject in high school through a skateboard. So I realized they could do that, but also because they made these community connections, they could be these vehicles for so much more. Also, I had a second teacher join me, Lauren Hardy. She was my intern and I was able to get her full time. And we were able to really kind of flesh out the program and offer more credits. And then we realized that the way that everyone works with at-risk youth is treating them like charity cases. So at that point, before that point, I'd be trying to convince someone to work with these kids. Like, please, could your company or business sponsor this thing with this kid, right? And then I stopped doing that. And I'm like, these youth are a resource for our community. Let's just reframe this whole conversation. So then we really began to treat ourselves as the students, and myself together, as a professional design studio. So we started offering things to the world. I took students to New York and we installed this 50-foot long design skateboard in an ad agency in New York City that we prototyped and installed. My students designed skateboards for Justin Bieber. But then, there's an element to this where the world probably doesn't need more things. We really reframed our entrepreneurship towards social justice. So I think the most powerful things we're doing right now, my OSF Girl Skate crew, which is kind of confronting and pushing against patriarchy in society and in skateboarding. So I use this idea now of push pedagogy. What are we pushing against and what are we pushing for? As we kind of reframed it, we also started attracting different students. So it became not just the white male skater kid. It became, we really started to build our crew with this idea that our diversity is our strength, and diversity lets us solve any design problem that comes our way. So all of a sudden, in the last few years, we've had, for example, more girls than guys in the program. Many young Black skateboarders and designers, like we're a real launching pad for young Black designers now. Lots of youth who identify as queer or trans. And that's still things in the skateboard world that are kind of like there's a tokenism a little bit to that. But we are at a moment, and I think we're part of that moment, also influencing the skateboard world, that we're saying, this is what a skateboard designer, skateboarder doesn't look the way you may have thought. And so now, so the Girl Skate Crew is a good example of that. I'm really proud of our work that we've been doing with Indigenous communities around what we call OSF Indig Skate. And we're really exploring the history of skateboarding that has kind of been whitewashed. Skateboards are an Indigenous technology if you think of them coming from surfboards. So we're kind of working with many Indigenous artists and elders and communities to reimagine the history of skateboarding through an Indigenous lens and explore Indigenous ways of knowing. And a big part of Indigenous ways of knowing, as I've learned it as a settler working with people, is that objects have materials have a vitality, and the humans, we're not the only actors here. So I think the movement idea in skateboards is more than a movement just in terms of traveling from point A to point B. It's actually seeding a youth movement towards social justice. Like I've always said, the skateboards are cool, and they're really, I think they bring some unique features to the success of what we have. But what I've done with my program could be something else. It could have been a food truck if I was a chef. What I've seeded is this idea of this production-based education that moves people a little bit away from process. Like there's a lot of process that happens in schools that never results in anything. But this idea that we create these things that are meaningful and they interact with the world. And that creates that conduit for students to be connected. And really, it's changed my thinking of being a designer as a designer of objects and just a maker of things to actually being a designer of relationships.